Some things are worth fighting for.
The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the Grandview Country Club, and I knew my marriage was over. Not because of the broken glass, honestly, I'd dropped plenty of those over the years, but because of what my wife Marta whispered to her sister Victoria as she watched me clean it up. God, Alex is such an embarrassment. Thank Christ Amelia found herself a real man. My daughter's wedding reception was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. Instead, it became the day I realized I'd been living a lie for 23 years. I'm Alex Carter, 47 years old, recently laid off from my finance director position at Morrison & Associates. I've got thinning brown hair, a slight paunch from too many desk lunches, and the kind of face people forget 5 minutes after meeting me. For 2 decades, I thought that was enough. I thought being reliable, faithful, and present made me a good husband and father. I was wrong. Daddy, are you okay? Amelia appeared beside me in her flowing white dress, concern creasing her beautiful face. At 22, she had her mother's striking features, but thankfully none of her cruelty. Just clumsy, I said, forcing a smile as I deposited the glass shards into a napkin. Your old man's got butterfingers today. Leave it for the staff, she said, taking my arm. Come meet David's parents properly. His father wants to talk to you about something important. I glanced across the reception hall where Marta held court near the bar, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the chandelier light. She wore a navy blue dress that cost more than my monthly unemployment check, laughing with Victoria and a cluster of her advertising agency colleagues. At 46, my wife was still stunning, the kind of woman who turned heads in restaurants and made other men wonder how someone like me had landed her. Victoria, 2 years younger and twice as vicious, leaned in close to Marta. Even from 30 feet away, I could read her lips. When are you going to dump the dead weight? Marta's response made my blood freeze. Soon. Very soon. Daddy? Amelia's voice seemed to come from underwater. You look pale. I'm fine, sweetheart. Lead the way. David's parents, the DeWitts, were everything Marta had hoped for in in-laws. Wealthy, connected, and completely unimpressed by her. Margaret DeWitt was a retired federal judge, and her husband Frank was a former police detective who'd built a successful private investigation firm. They treated Amelia like a daughter and me like family, which only highlighted how differently Marta's circle viewed me. Alex, Frank said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. Heck of a party. Your daughter's got good taste. She gets that from her mother, I replied automatically, the lie bitter on my tongue. Frank's weathered face creased into a knowing smile. Actually, I think she gets it from you. Margaret and I have been watching the family dynamics tonight. Interesting stuff. Before I could ask what he meant, Marta's voice cut through the reception noise like a blade. Alex, there you are, hiding in the corner again. She approached with Victoria in tow, both women slightly unsteady from champagne. The photographer wants family pictures and we can't find you anywhere. I was right here, talking to David's parents. Yes, I can see that. Marta's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I'm sure they're fascinated by your unemployment stories. The insult landed like a physical blow. Victoria smirked, and I felt my face burn with humiliation. But before I could respond, Margaret DeWitt stepped forward. Actually, Mrs. Carter, we were discussing Alex's consulting opportunities. My husband's firm could use someone with his financial expertise. Marta's smile faltered. Oh, well, that's nice. Very nice, Frank agreed, his cop's eyes studying Marta with uncomfortable intensity. Alex strikes me as the kind of man who lands on his feet, the kind who sees things others miss. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Victoria, never one to read a room, chose that moment to giggle and whisper something in Marta's ear that made my wife's eyes widen. What's so funny? Amelia asked, her voice carrying an edge I'd rarely heard. Victoria, emboldened by alcohol and stupidity, grinned. Oh, just sharing some gossip about your father's situation. What situation? David appeared beside his wife, his jaw set. At 24, my new son-in-law was everything I wasn't. Tall, confident, and completely unintimidated by Marta's social games. Nothing important, Marta said quickly, shooting Victoria a warning look, but Victoria was too drunk to stop. Just that some people are better at playing house than others. Some people know how to treat a real man. The words hung in the air like poison gas. I felt something inside me crack. Not break, but crack, like ice under pressure. Around us, conversations died as people sensed the brewing storm. Victoria, Frank's voice carried 30 years of police authority. I think you've had enough champagne. I think, Amelia said, her voice deadly quiet, you need to explain what you just said about my father. Victoria looked around, suddenly realizing she'd stepped in quicksand. You meant to insult my dad at my wedding, Amelia continued. You meant to humiliate him in front of my new family. Is that right? Amelia, please, Marta tried to intervene. Victoria didn't mean anything by it. She's just drunk and cruel, David suggested. Like someone else I could mention? The accusation hit Marta like a slap. Her carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing something ugly underneath. How dare you speak to me that way? I'm your wife's mother. And he's her father, Margaret said coolly. The parent who actually raised her while you were busy building your career and social life. I watched in amazement as my new family, people who'd known me for less than a year, defended me against my wife of 23 years. The irony was almost funny. Almost. This is ridiculous, Marta snapped. Alex, say something. For 23 years, I would have said something. I would have smoothed things over, made excuses, played the peacemaker. I would have absorbed the humiliation and pretended it didn't matter. Not tonight. What would you like me to say, Marta? That Victoria's right? That I'm not a real man? That I don't deserve respect at my own daughter's wedding? My wife's face went pale. Around us, the reception had gone completely silent. That's not what It's exactly what you meant, I said quietly. It's what you've meant for years. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Marta opened her mouth, then closed it. Victoria grabbed her arm, whispering urgently. After a moment that felt like an eternity, my wife straightened her shoulders. We'll discuss this at home, she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. Will we? I asked. Or will you discuss it with someone else? Someone more real? The blow hit home. Marta's face went white, then red. She turned on her heel and stalked away, Victoria scrambling to follow. Frank DeWitt watched them go, then turned to me with something like approval in his eyes. Interesting evening, he said. Alex, why don't you come by my office Monday morning? I think we need to have a conversation. As the reception slowly returned to life around us, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not for my marriage, that was clearly over, but for myself, for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to keep playing the fool. The wedding wasn't over, but my old life was. Monday morning found me sitting in Frank DeWitt's downtown office, nursing black coffee and trying to process what he was telling me. Your wife's having an affair, he said without preamble. Has been for at least 6 months, probably longer. The words should have hit me like a truck. Instead, they felt like confirmation of something I'd known but refused to acknowledge. How can you be sure? Frank slid a manila folder across his desk. 28 years as a cop teaches you to read people. Your wife's behavior at the wedding, the casual cruelty, the way she looked at you like you were already gone. That's not marital problems. That's guilt manifesting as hostility. I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of credit card statements, phone records, and what looked like surveillance photos. Jesus, Frank, how did you... Your daughter asked me to look into some irregularities in your joint accounts. She's been worried about you since you lost your job. Thought maybe Marta was hiding assets. He leaned back in his chair. Turns out she was hiding more than money. The photos showed Marta entering and leaving a downtown hotel with a man I recognized from her office Christmas parties. Greg Mason, one of her subordinates. Younger, fitter, and apparently not concerned about workplace ethics. Greg Mason, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. He's married. Not happily, according to my sources. Wife's been suspicious for months. Frank pointed to the credit card statements. Look at the pattern. Lunch dates that last 3 hours. Hotel charges on weekdays. Expensive gifts that never made it home to you. I studied the evidence, my finance background automatically cataloging the deception. Separate credit cards I didn't know about. Cash withdrawals that didn't match our household expenses. A paper trail of betrayal hidden in plain sight. There's more, Frank continued. The hotel isn't the only place they meet. Mason owns a lake house through a shell company. Very private, very expensive. Your wife's been helping him hide assets from his own divorce proceedings. So she's not just cheating, she's helping him commit fraud. Looks that way. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I closed the folder and met his eyes. I want to destroy them both. Frank smiled grimly. I was hoping you'd say that. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into investigation with the focus I'd once reserved for corporate audits. Frank provided the professional expertise, but I supplied the intimate knowledge of Marta's habits and weaknesses. We discovered that Greg Mason was everything I wasn't. 6 feet tall, athletic, with the kind of easy confidence that came from inherited wealth and unearned privilege. His lake house was worth more than our family home, purchased with money from a trust fund his grandfather had established. He drove a BMW, worked out daily, and had never faced a real challenge in his privileged life. He was also spectacularly stupid. "Look at this," Frank said, spreading new photos across his desk. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Lunch at Romano's, holding hands across the table, kissing in the parking lot of her office building. Your wife's gotten sloppy." "She thinks I'm too pathetic to notice," I replied, studying a picture of Marta laughing at something Greg had said. She looked happier than I'd seen her in years. Or too weak to do anything about it. "Are you?" The question hung in the air between us. 6 months ago, the answer would have been yes. 6 months ago, I would have confronted Marta, demanded an explanation, probably begged her to end it and come back to me. But 6 months ago, I hadn't watched my wife humiliate me at our daughter's wedding. I hadn't seen the contempt in her eyes or heard her sister joke about my inadequacy. I hadn't realized that the woman I'd loved for over 2 decades viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle to her happiness. "No," I said finally. "I'm not." Frank nodded approvingly. "Good, because I've got some ideas." The first phase of our plan was simple: documentation. While Frank handled the professional surveillance, I became a student of my wife's deceptions. I memorized her schedule, noted every lie, cataloged every excuse. I learned that she met Greg twice a week at the downtown Marriott, told me she was working late when she was actually at his lake house, and had been systematically moving money from our joint accounts into ones I couldn't access. More painfully, I discovered that Victoria wasn't just an enabler. She was an active participant. Text messages revealed that my sister-in-law had been covering for Marta's affair, providing alibis and even joining them for weekend trips to the lake house. The woman who'd insulted me at my daughter's wedding had been facilitating my wife's betrayal for months. "It gets worse," Frank told me during our 3rd week of surveillance. "Mason's been bragging about the affair at his gym. Apparently, he thinks seducing his boss's wife makes him some kind of alpha male." "What's he been saying?" Frank's expression darkened. "Nothing you want to hear, but everything you need to know about his character." I pressed him for details, and reluctantly, he shared some of Greg's boasts. How Marta was desperate for a real man. How I was too pathetic to satisfy a woman like her. How he was going to convince her to divorce me and marry him once his own divorce was finalized. Each revelation was like a knife twist, but also fuel for the fire building inside me. Greg Mason thought he was clever, thought he was taking something from a man too weak to fight back. He was about to learn how wrong he was. "There's something else," Frank said, pulling out a new set of documents. "Mason's not as wealthy as he pretends. The lake house is mortgaged to the hilt. His trust fund is nearly depleted, and he's been using company resources to fund his lifestyle. If someone were to bring this to the attention of his employers, he'd be fired and possibly prosecuted." "Exactly. And if someone were to inform his wife about the affair and the financial irregularities, his divorce would get very expensive very quickly." Frank smiled. "I like the way you think. But I wasn't ready for legal warfare yet. First, I wanted to send a message. I wanted Greg Mason to understand that he'd made a serious mistake when he decided to destroy my family. The opportunity came the following Friday night. Marta claimed she was attending a company retreat, but Frank's surveillance confirmed she was actually spending the weekend at the lake house with Greg. I had 48 hours to make my move. The lake house sat on 3 acres of private waterfront, accessible only by a winding dirt road. Greg's BMW was parked in the circular driveway, and lights glowed warmly in the windows. Through my binoculars, I could see my wife and her lover sharing dinner on the deck, laughing and touching like teenagers. I waited until midnight, then made my approach. The house had a security system, but Greg had made the classic mistake of using his birthday as the access code. It took me less than 5 minutes to disable the cameras and motion sensors. I didn't go inside. Instead, I focused on the thing Greg loved most after my wife, his pristine BMW. Using a set of keys I'd had duplicated from Marta's purse, I moved the car to a more secluded spot on the property. Then I got to work. I didn't damage the engine or slash the tires. Nothing that would be immediately obvious. Instead, I loosened the battery cables, disconnected a few key sensors, and removed several important fuses. The car would start, but it wouldn't run properly, and the problems would manifest gradually over several days. More importantly, I left a calling card. Tucked under the windshield wiper was a single photograph, the wedding picture from Amelia's reception, the one showing our whole family together. On the back, I'd written a simple message. Some things are worth fighting for. Then I settled in to wait. Saturday morning brought chaos. I watched from my concealed position as Greg discovered his car troubles, cursing and kicking the tires while Marta stood by looking frustrated. They spent 2 hours trying to get the BMW running properly, missing their planned breakfast date and ruining their romantic morning. When Greg finally found the photograph, his face went white. He showed it to Marta, and I watched my wife's expression cycle through confusion, fear, and finally rage. She knew I'd found them out. She knew I'd been there, watching, planning. Most importantly, she knew I wasn't the weak, pathetic man she'd married anymore. As they packed hurriedly and called for a tow truck, I smiled grimly and started my own car. Phase 1 was complete. Greg Mason had received his first warning, and Marta had gotten her first taste of what it felt like to be hunted instead of the hunter. But this was just the beginning. Before I was finished, both of them would understand exactly what they'd lost when they decided to betray me. The game had officially begun. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Marta stormed into our house Sunday evening, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "What the heck do you think you're doing, Alex?" I looked up from the financial documents I'd been reviewing at the kitchen table, bank statements, credit card bills, and mortgage papers that painted a very interesting picture of our marriage's final months. "I'm trying to understand where our money's been going," I said calmly. "Funny thing about being unemployed. Gives you time to really dig into the household finances." Her face went pale. "You had no right to follow me." "Follow you?" I raised an eyebrow. "I haven't been following anyone. Though I have to say, your story about the company retreat was creative, especially since your company doesn't have retreats in October." Marta's hands shook as she set her purse on the counter. 23 years of marriage had taught me to read her moods, and right now she was terrified. "I don't know what you think you know. I know you've been stealing from our joint accounts to fund your affair with Greg Mason." I spread the bank statements across the table. "I know you've been using company credit cards for personal expenses. I know you've been helping Greg hide assets from his wife's divorce attorney." Each accusation hit her like a physical blow. She sank into the chair across from me, her designer facade crumbling. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to document everything." I slid a thick folder across the table. "Frank DeWitt is very thorough. 28 years as a cop teaches you how to build an airtight case." She opened the folder with trembling hands, her face growing paler with each photograph and document. "Jesus, Alex, what do you want?" "I want to understand why." I leaned back in my chair, studying the woman I'd loved for over 2 decades. Was I really that terrible a husband? Did I deserve this? For a moment, something like guilt flickered across her features. Then her expression hardened into the cold mask I'd grown to recognize. "You want the truth? Fine. You stopped trying years ago, Alex. You got comfortable, complacent. When's the last time you surprised me? When's the last time you made me feel like a woman instead of a roommate? So you decided to find someone who would. Greg makes me feel alive again. He's passionate, ambitious, exciting. Everything you used to be before you settled for mediocrity." The words stung, but I've been preparing for this conversation for weeks. "Is that why you've been moving money into accounts I can't access? Because Greg's so passionate and exciting?" Her face flushed red. "That money is for my future. Our future." "Your future with a man who's been bragging about sleeping with you to his gym buddies? Who calls you his desperate housewife conquest behind your back?" The color drained from her face. "That's not true." I pulled out my phone and played an audio recording Frank had obtained through his gym contacts. Greg's voice filled the kitchen, crude and boastful as he described his affair with the boss's wife to his workout partners. "She's so hungry for a real man, she'll do anything I want. Her husband's this pathetic loser who got laid off. Probably couldn't satisfy her if he tried. I'm doing her a favor, really." Marta's hand flew to her mouth as Greg's laughter echoed through our kitchen. When the recording ended, tears were streaming down her face. "He doesn't mean it," she whispered. "He's just..." Men talk like that when they're together. Do they? Is that how I talk about you to my friends? She had no answer for that. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. You're going to end this affair. You're going to return every penny you stole from our accounts, and you're going to start marriage counseling with me. And if I don't, I smiled grimly, then Frank sends his evidence to your company's ethics board, the state attorney general's office, and Greg's wife's divorce attorney. You'll both be facing criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. She stared at me in shock. You wouldn't. Try me. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Then Marta straightened her shoulders, and I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Strong, defiant, beautiful. No, she said quietly. No, I won't end it. I won't pretend this marriage can be saved. She met my eyes directly. I want a divorce, Alex. I want to be with Greg. The words should have devastated me. Instead, I felt something like relief. The pretense was finally over. Even after hearing what he really thinks of you? People say things they don't mean when they're trying to impress others. Greg loves me. Greg loves your money and your connections. When both of those are gone, and they will be gone. How long do you think his love will last? She stood up, gathering her purse and jacket. I'm going to stay at Victoria's tonight. We can discuss divorce terms tomorrow. Actually, you're not. She paused at the kitchen doorway. Excuse me? Victoria's having her own problems right now. Seems someone sent her husband evidence of her affairs, multiple affairs spanning several years. Robert filed for divorce this morning and changed the locks on their house. Marta's face went white. What did you do? I didn't do anything. But Frank has contacts everywhere, and Victoria made a lot of enemies with her behavior at Amelia's wedding. Turns out several wives have been waiting for an opportunity to expose her. You bastard. I'm just getting started. I stood up, and for the first time in months, I felt tall. You want a divorce? Fine, but you're not taking half of everything I've worked for to start a new life with your boyfriend. You're not destroying our family and walking away rich. The law says a lot of things about adultery and financial fraud. Want to find out how a judge feels about wives who steal from joint accounts to fund affairs with subordinates? She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating the odds, weighing her options. Finally, she spoke. What do you want, Alex? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to realize that the weak, pathetic man you married isn't as helpless as you thought. I moved closer, and she actually took a step back. Most of all, I want you and Greg to suffer the way you made me suffer. You're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. Because everything you thought you knew about me was wrong. She left that night, but not to Victoria's. Frank's surveillance confirmed she went straight to Greg's apartment, where they spent hours arguing about their rapidly deteriorating situation. By morning, both of them looked haggard and desperate. Phase 2 was about to begin, and it would be much more personal than Phase 1. I'd spent 23 years being the kind of man who avoided confrontation, who smoothed over problems, who took the path of least resistance. That man was gone, replaced by someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Marta and Greg had destroyed my marriage, humiliated me publicly, and stolen my money. Now they were about to learn what real consequences looked like. The gloves were officially off. Greg Mason made his first mistake Monday morning when he showed up at Marta's office building, driving a rental car and looking like he hadn't slept in days. His second mistake was getting into a shouting match with building security when they questioned his right to be there. His third mistake was not realizing I was watching from across the street. Frank had positioned surveillance teams around both their workplaces, and the intelligence we gathered painted a picture of two people in full panic mode. Greg's BMW was still in the shop, with mysterious electrical problems that no mechanic could seem to fix. Marta had been called into 3 separate meetings with her company's executive team, and both of them were fielding increasingly hostile calls from Greg's wife's divorce attorney. They're cracking, Frank reported during our Tuesday morning briefing. Mason withdrew $15,000 in cash yesterday, probably planning to run. Let him run. It'll just make him look more guilty. What about your wife? I considered the question. Marta was many things, but she wasn't a coward. She'd fight until the bitter end, which made her more dangerous than Greg, but also more predictable. She'll try to salvage what she can, probably throw Greg under the bus to save herself. Frank nodded approvingly. Smart woman. Too bad she's not smart enough to realize she's already lost. That afternoon brought an unexpected development. Amelia called, her voice tight with controlled anger. Dad, I just got off the phone with Mom. She's saying terrible things about you, claiming you're stalking her and making threats. Please tell me that's not true. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar stab of pain. Even now, Marta was trying to turn our children against me. Your mother and I are having some serious problems, sweetheart, but I've never threatened her or anyone else. She says you hired someone to follow her. She says you broke into her boyfriend's car. The word boyfriend hung in the air like poison. So Marta had finally admitted the affair to our daughter. I hired Frank to investigate some financial irregularities in our accounts. What he found was disturbing. The affair. Among other things, Amelia was quiet for a long moment. How long has it been going on? At least 6 months, probably longer. I'm so sorry, Dad. I had no idea. It's not your fault, honey. None of this is your fault. What are you going to do? The question everyone kept asking. What was I going to do? The old Alex would have filed for divorce, split the assets, and tried to move on with his life. The old Alex would have taken the high road, but the old Alex was dead. I'm going to make sure your mother and her boyfriend face the consequences of their choices. Dad, please don't do anything illegal. I can't lose you too. Her words hit me like a physical blow. You're not losing me, Amelia, I promise. Everything I'm doing is completely legal. After we hung up, I sat in my empty house and considered my options. Marta was trying to control the narrative, painting me as the villain in our marriage's collapse. She was probably telling everyone who would listen that I was unstable, vindictive, dangerous. Time to prove her right. Wednesday evening found me parked outside Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant where Marta and Greg had shared so many intimate lunches. Frank's intelligence indicated they were meeting there tonight, probably to plan their next move. I didn't have to wait long. They arrived separately, Greg in his rental car, Marta in her Lexus, and met at a corner table partially hidden from the main dining room. Through the window, I could see them talking intensely, their body language tense and worried. I gave them 30 minutes to get comfortable, then made my entrance. The hostess tried to seat me across the restaurant, but I insisted on a table near the bar with a clear view of my targets. Greg noticed me first, his face going pale as he whispered urgently to Marta. My wife turned in her chair, and when our eyes met, I raised my wine glass in a mock toast. The effect was immediate and satisfying. Marta's hand shook as she reached for her purse, and Greg looked like he was about to be sick. They'd been planning their next move, feeling safe in their little bubble of deception, and suddenly I was there, watching, judging, reminding them that their actions had consequences. I ordered dinner and ate slowly, savoring both the excellent pasta and the obvious discomfort of my wife and her boyfriend. Every few minutes, I'd glance over and smile just to keep them on edge. They lasted 20 minutes before fleeing, leaving half their meals untouched and a substantial bill unpaid. I settled their check along with my own, adding a generous tip for the server who'd had to deal with their hasty departure. As I walked to my car, Greg was waiting for me in the parking lot. What the heck do you want, Alex? Up close, he was everything I'd expected. Tall, handsome, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never facing real adversity. But there was something else in his eyes now. Fear. I want you to stop sleeping with my wife. He laughed, but it sounded forced. That's between Marta and me. You don't get a vote. Actually, I do. See, when you sleep with another man's wife and help her steal money from joint accounts, you make it my business. I never stole anything. No? What about the company credit cards, the hotel charges, the cash withdrawals from accounts that don't belong to you? His face flushed red. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I also know about your financial problems, your failing marriage, and your desperate need for someone else to fund your lifestyle. You're crazy. I stepped closer, and he actually backed up against his rental car. For all his physical advantages, Greg Mason had never been in a real fight in his life. Maybe I am crazy. 23 years of marriage to a cheating wife might do that to a man. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to call the police. Go ahead. I'm sure they'd love to hear about your financial irregularities. Frank DeWitt has contacts throughout the department. They're very interested in white-collar crime these days. Greg's bravado crumbled completely. What do you want? I want you to understand that you made a serious mistake when you decided to destroy my family. I want you to realize that every action has consequences. I moved even closer, close enough to smell his expensive cologne and see the sweat beading on his forehead. Most of all, I want you to be afraid. Afraid of what? I smiled, and he flinched. Afraid of me. I left him standing in the parking lot and drove home, feeling better than I had in months. The old Alex would never have confronted another man like that, would never have used intimidation to make a point. But the old Alex had been weak, passive, easily dismissed. This new version of me was something else entirely. Thursday brought news that Greg had called in sick to work, and Marta had been suspended pending an internal investigation into her expense accounts. Friday brought even better news. Greg's wife had filed an emergency motion to freeze all his assets, claiming he was hiding money and planning to flee the state. By Saturday, both of them were trapped, financially, legally, and emotionally. Their affair, which had seemed so exciting and liberating just weeks ago, had become a nightmare that was destroying both their lives. But I wasn't finished yet. The final phase of my revenge required perfect timing and absolute commitment. Marta and Greg had humiliated me publicly, stolen from me systematically, and destroyed my family without a second thought. Now it was time to return the favor. The endgame was about to begin. The call came at 6 a.m. Sunday morning. Marta's voice was hoarse, desperate, nothing like the confident woman who'd walked out of our house a week ago. Alex, we need to talk. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Meet me at Brewster's Coffee on 5th Street. 1 hour. I found her in a corner booth, looking like she'd aged 10 years in 7 days. Her usually perfect hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her designer clothes had been replaced by jeans and a wrinkled sweater. Most telling of all, she wasn't wearing makeup, something I hadn't seen in over a decade. You look terrible, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. Thanks. You look different. She was right. I'd been working out with Frank, eating better, sleeping well for the first time in months. Destroying my wife's life was apparently good for my health. What do you want, Marta? I want this to stop. The surveillance, the intimidation, the financial warfare. It has to stop. Or what? She laughed bitterly. Or nothing. You've made it very clear that I have no leverage here. Finally, some honesty. It's refreshing. Greg's wife filed for an emergency restraining order yesterday. He can't go within 500 feet of his own house or children. His company put him on administrative leave pending a criminal investigation. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. His life is over, Alex. Isn't that enough? Is it enough for you? What do you mean? I mean, are you satisfied with what you've done to our family? To our children? To me? She was quiet for a long moment. I never meant for it to go this far. You never meant to get caught. That's not... She stopped, sighing heavily. Maybe you're right. Maybe I thought I was smarter than I actually am. You thought I was weaker than I actually am. That was your real mistake. So what happens now? You've destroyed Greg, humiliated me, turned our children against me. What's left? I studied her face, looking for any trace of the woman I'd loved for 23 years. She was still beautiful, even exhausted and defeated. But something essential was gone. The spark, the confidence, the sense of possibility that had first attracted me all those years ago. What's left is the truth, I said finally. The whole truth told publicly, so everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Her face went pale. Alex, please. Think about Amelia and Ross. Do you really want them to see their mother destroyed in public? You should have thought about our children before you decided to have an affair. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. You made a series of calculated choices over many months. You stole money, lied repeatedly, and humiliated me in front of our family and friends. I leaned forward. Most importantly, you showed no remorse until you got caught. I'm showing remorse now. You're showing fear. There's a difference. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Please, Alex. I'll do anything. I'll give you everything in the divorce. I'll admit fault publicly. I'll disappear if that's what you want. Just don't destroy me completely. For a moment, I felt something like pity. This broken woman, begging for mercy, bore little resemblance to the confident executive who'd walked out of our house a week ago. But then I remembered Greg's crude boasts about my inadequacy, Victoria's smug insults at our daughter's wedding, and Marta's own contemptuous dismissal of our marriage. No, I said, pulling my hand away. You made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences. What are you going to do? I stood up, leaving money on the table for my untouched coffee. You'll find out soon enough. Monday morning, Frank and I walked into the offices of Morrison & Associates, my former employer and the company that handled Marta's advertising agency's financial accounts. The meeting had been arranged through Margaret DeWitt's connections, and we were ushered directly into the conference room where 3 executives waited. Gentlemen, Frank began, we're here to discuss some irregularities we've discovered in the accounts of Sterling & Associates Advertising. For the next hour, we laid out our evidence methodically. The fraudulent expense reports, the misuse of company credit cards, the systematic theft of client funds to finance personal activities. By the time we finished, all 3 executives looked sick. How much money are we talking about? Asked the senior partner. Approximately $75,000 over 8 months, I replied. All of it documented, all of it traceable to personal expenses related to Mrs. Carter's extramarital affair. Jesus Christ, muttered another executive. We handle their pension fund, their insurance policies. If this gets out, we could lose the entire account. It's going to get out, Frank said bluntly. The question is whether you want to be seen as part of the problem or part of the solution. By Tuesday afternoon, Marta had been fired from her job and escorted from the building by security. By Wednesday, the story had leaked to the local business journal. By Thursday, it was front-page news in the city paper. Advertising executive fired for embezzlement affair. The article was devastating in its thoroughness. It detailed not just the financial crimes, but the personal betrayals, the married subordinate, the systematic deception, the impact on the families involved. Marta's name and photograph were prominently featured, along with quotes from sources close to the investigation about her lack of remorse and attempts to blame others for her actions. Greg fared even worse. His company not only fired him but filed criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. His wife's divorce attorney used the scandal to secure a settlement that left him with virtually nothing. Within a week, he'd gone from successful executive to unemployed pariah facing potential prison time. Friday brought the final blow. Victoria, already reeling from her own divorce, was arrested for tax evasion after someone, Frank claimed not to know who, tipped off the IRS about her unreported income from various affairs with wealthy married men. The investigation revealed a pattern of extortion and blackmail going back years. By Saturday, all 3 of them had been destroyed professionally, financially, and socially. Their names were toxic in business circles, their reputations ruined beyond repair. The network of friends and associates who had once enabled their behavior now avoided them like plague carriers. I should have felt satisfied. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt empty, like a man who'd won a war but lost everything worth fighting for in the process. Sunday evening, I was sitting in my empty house when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Amelia and David, both looking concerned. "Dad, we need to talk," Amelia said. We sat in the living room where Marta and I had once hosted dinner parties and Christmas mornings, where our children had opened presents and celebrated birthdays. Now it felt like a mausoleum, full of memories of a life that no longer existed. "We're worried about you," David said. "This whole situation with Mom and her boyfriend, it's gotten out of hand." "Has it?" "Dad, she's been completely destroyed. Her career, her reputation, her finances, everything's gone." Amelia's voice was gentle but firm. "I know she hurt you terribly, but this feels like overkill." "Does it?" "She stole $75,000 from client accounts to finance her affair. She helped Greg hide assets from his wife. She committed multiple felonies while destroying our family." I looked at my daughter. What exactly should I have done differently? You could have just divorced her quietly, split the assets, moved on with your life, and let her walk away rich and unpunished? Let her start a new life with Greg using money she stole from me and her clients? Yes, if it meant preserving some dignity for everyone involved. I considered her words. The old Alex would have agreed, would have taken the high road, would have absorbed the humiliation in silence to avoid making waves. "I'd tried dignity for 23 years, I said finally. It got me a cheating wife and public humiliation at my own daughter's wedding." "So you decided to become someone else? Someone cruel and vindictive?" The accusation stung because it contained truth. I had become someone else, someone harder, more calculating, willing to use any tool available to destroy his enemies. I decided to become someone who fights back. Amelia and David exchanged glances. Dad, she said carefully, we're not sure we like this new version of you. Her words hit me like a physical blow. In my quest to punish Marta and Greg, I'd apparently alienated the people who mattered most to me. I'm still your father. I still love you more than anything in the world. We know that, but love isn't enough if you become someone we can't respect. They left soon after, and I sat alone in my empty house, wondering if my revenge had cost me more than my marriage. Had I won the war only to lose my children's respect? Had I destroyed Marta only to destroy myself in the process? The questions haunted me through the night, but by morning, I had my answers. I wasn't the same man I'd been 6 months ago. That man was weak, passive, easily dismissed, but I wasn't the monster my daughter seemed to think I'd become either. I was something new, something harder, but not necessarily worse. I was a man who'd learned to fight for what mattered to him, who refused to be victimized by people who mistook kindness for weakness. Marta and Greg had made their choices. They'd destroyed my family, stolen my money, and humiliated me publicly. Everything that happened to them afterward was simply the natural consequence of their actions. I hadn't become cruel or vindictive. I'd simply stopped being a victim. And that, I realized, was something I could live with. 3 months after Marta's public downfall, I received an unexpected phone call from my son Ross. Dad, I'm flying in for the weekend. We need to talk. Ross had been living in Seattle since college, working as a software engineer and carefully avoiding the drama that had consumed our family. At 24, he was more diplomatic than his sister, but also more direct when something needed to be said. He arrived Friday evening looking like a younger version of me. Same brown hair, same thoughtful expression, same tendency to analyze problems from every angle before acting. The house looks good, he said, glancing around the living room I'd redecorated after Marta moved out. Your mother took most of the furniture when she left. I had to start over. How are you doing? Really? I considered the question, how was I doing? Professionally, I was thriving. Frank had made good on his offer, and I was now a partner in his investigative firm. Personally, I was still adjusting to life as a single man after 23 years of marriage. Emotionally, I was complicated. I'm better than I was 6 months ago. Different, but better. Amelia's worried about you. She thinks you went too far with Mom. And what do you think? Ross was quiet for a moment, studying my face. I think Mom got exactly what she deserved, but I also think you're not the same person you used to be. Is that necessarily bad? I don't know yet. That's why I'm here. We spent Saturday morning catching up. His job, his girlfriend, his plans for the future. It felt good to talk about normal things, to remember that life existed beyond the wreckage of my marriage. Saturday afternoon brought an unwelcome surprise. Victoria showed up at my door looking haggard and desperate. Alex, I need to talk to you. I have nothing to say to you. Please, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She looked terrible, thin, pale, with the hollow-eyed appearance of someone who hadn't been sleeping. Her legal troubles had aged her dramatically. I know you hate me, she began. I know I said terrible things about you, enabled Marta's affair, helped destroy your marriage, but I'm begging you to call off your dogs. My dogs? The IRS investigation, the criminal charges, the media attention. I know it's all connected to you. You're giving me too much credit. I'm just an unemployed finance director, remember? Not some criminal mastermind. Don't play games with me, Alex. We both know what you're capable of now. From the kitchen, I heard Ross moving around, probably making coffee. I hoped he was listening to this conversation. It might help him understand what kind of people I'd been dealing with. What exactly do you want from me, Victoria? I want you to make it stop. I've lost everything. My marriage, my house, my reputation. I'm facing 5 years in federal prison. Isn't that enough revenge for you? Revenge? I didn't report your tax evasion to the IRS. I didn't make you extort money from your married lovers. I didn't force you to commit crimes for over a decade. You orchestrated this whole thing? I documented crimes that had already been committed. There's a difference. She stared at me with something like hatred. You used to be such a nice man. Weak, but nice. Now you're just cold. Now I'm just tired of being everyone's victim. So you decided to become the victimizer? I decided to hold people accountable for their actions. She laughed bitterly. Is that what you call it? Accountability? What would you call it? Revenge, pure and simple. Maybe she was right. Maybe everything I'd done over the past 6 months had been motivated by revenge rather than justice. But if so, it was revenge that had been earned through years of humiliation and betrayal. "Your 5 minutes are up," I said, walking to the front door. "Alex, please." "Victoria, you spent years treating me like dirt under your shoes. You enabled your sister's affair, helped her steal money, and publicly humiliated me at my daughter's wedding. Now you want mercy?" I opened the door. "You should have thought about consequences before you decided to destroy my family." She left without another word, and I found Ross waiting in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee. "She's right, he said quietly, "about what you've become." "And what's that?" "Someone I don't entirely recognize." His words hurt more than I wanted to admit. "Do you think I was wrong? To fight back, I mean?" "No, I think you were right to fight back, but I think maybe you won the war and kept fighting anyway." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Mom and Greg and Victoria all got what they deserved, but you didn't stop there. You kept pushing, kept destroying, even after they were already beaten." I sipped my coffee, considering his words. Maybe you're right. The question is, what happens now? Do you keep being this person, this cold, calculating version of yourself? Or do you find a way back to being someone your children can be proud of? Sunday morning brought another unexpected visitor. Marta stood on my doorstep looking nervous and uncertain. "Ross called me," she said. "He thought we should talk." I looked past her to where my son waited by his rental car. He nodded encouragingly, then drove away, leaving us alone. "You look well," I said, which wasn't entirely true. Marta had lost weight, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. But she was still beautiful, still the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "Can I come in?" We sat in the living room, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, she spoke. "I wanted to apologize. Not because I think it'll change anything, but because you deserve to hear it." "Apologize for what, specifically?" "For the affair, for stealing money, for humiliating you at Amelia's wedding, for 23 years of taking you for granted." She met my eyes. "For all of it. Why now?" "Because I've had 6 months to think about what I threw away. Because I realize now that you were a good husband and I was too selfish to appreciate it." "And Greg? How's your great love affair working out?" She laughed bitterly. "Greg disappeared the day after he was arrested, packed a bag and left town without a word. Turns out his love wasn't quite as strong as he claimed." "I'm sorry." "Are you? Really?" I considered the question honestly. "Yes, I am. Not sorry that he left. He was using you from the beginning. But sorry that you had to learn it the hard way. I destroyed everything, didn't I? Our marriage, our family, my career, everything. You made choices. We all make choices. And you chose to destroy me in return. I chose to hold you accountable. Is there a difference? I think so. But I'm not sure it matters anymore." We talked for another hour, covering 23 years of marriage in careful, measured sentences. She told me about her loneliness, her fear of aging, her desperate need to feel desired again. I told her about my own failures, my complacency, my gradual withdrawal from our emotional life. By the end, we both understood that our marriage had been dying long before Greg Mason entered the picture. The affair was a symptom, not the disease. "What happens now?" she asked as she prepared to leave. "Now we both move on with our lives. Can you forgive me? Eventually?" I thought about it. "I don't know. Maybe. But I'll never forget. I wouldn't expect you to." After she left, I sat alone in my house and took inventory of my life. I'd won my war against Marta and Greg. They'd both been destroyed professionally and personally. Victoria was facing prison time. I'd been vindicated, proven right, shown to be the victim rather than the villain. So why did I feel so empty? Ross's words echoed in my mind. You won the war and kept fighting anyway. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd become so focused on revenge that I'd lost sight of what really mattered. Maybe in my quest to punish my enemies, I'd become someone my children couldn't respect. That evening, I called Amelia. "Dad, is everything okay?" "I want to apologize," I said, "for the man I became over the past 6 months, for letting anger and revenge consume me." "Dad, let me finish. Your mother hurt me badly, and I had every right to defend myself. But I went too far. I became someone I don't like very much. You're still my father. I still love you. But you don't respect me." Ross said as much. She was quiet for a moment. I respect that you fought back. I just wish you'd known when to stop. I'm stopping now. The war is over. What does that mean? It means I'm going to try to be the man you and Ross can be proud of again. It means I'm done being consumed by anger. And Mom? Your mother and I are finished, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life trying to punish her. I'm glad, Dad. I've missed the person you used to be. That person was weak. That person was kind. There's a difference. After we hung up, I poured myself a drink and stood on my back deck, looking out at the garden Marta and I had planted together years ago. Most of it had died from neglect during our final months together, but some hardy perennials were starting to show new growth. Maybe that was a metaphor for something, maybe not, but for the first time in 6 months, I felt like the future held possibilities beyond revenge and anger. The war was over. I'd won, but at a cost I was only beginning to understand. Now came the harder challenge, learning to live with the man I'd become and finding a way back to the man I wanted to be. Ross was right. I'd kept fighting even after victory was assured. But that fight was over now. It was time to put down my tools and figure out what came next. For the first time since Amelia's wedding, I felt something like peace. The phone rang, breaking my reverie. Frank's voice was excited. "Alex, you need to see the news. Greg Mason was arrested trying to board a plane to Mexico. They found him with fake documents and $200,000 in cash. Where did he get that kind of money? That's the interesting part. Looks like he's been running a much bigger scam than we realized. The FBI thinks he's stolen over $1 million from various sources over the past 3 years." I felt a familiar surge of satisfaction, followed immediately by exhaustion. Even now, even after I'd decided to move on, the war kept finding new battles. "Frank, I don't want to be involved in this anymore." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm done. Greg is the FBI's problem now. Whatever he's done, whatever he's stolen, it's not my fight anymore." "But Alex, this could vindicate you completely. Show that you were the victim of a much larger criminal conspiracy. I don't need vindication. I need peace." There was a long pause. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure." "All right then. I'll handle the FBI interviews myself. You're officially out of it." After I hung up, I realized that for the first time in 6 months, I truly was out of it. The war was over, my enemies were defeated, and I was free to figure out who I wanted to be next. It felt like the first day of the rest of my life.